Hello, my name is Chrm, and today I'm going to be critically discussing critical thinking, giving my views on whether it's a vital skill for human resource managers today. I'm going to be discussing numerous ideas about critical thinking and analysing and investigating how far critical thinking has become detrimental within the role of an HR manager today. So in 2010, the American Management Association highlighted the importance of these critical skills in a modern workplace and how there's an increasing demand for them. They stated that it was a result of finding out what numerous employees look for and appraise. It was found proficiency in the basic areas of reading, writing and arithmetic has traditionally been the entry-level threshold of the job market, but the modern workplace requires more from its employees. They suggested 4 C's that are becoming more and more important for employees to hold, critical thinking and problem solving being one of them. This may provide evidence as to why it's important for all employees of an organisation to hold these critical skills. And it's become more of an issue due to the current decline in the job market, raising questions about whether there should be more of an effort made by employees to not only recruit but train existing employees with these skills. As HR managers, or in fact managers in general, should lead and direct others within the organisation, arguably it's most vital for them to possess these skills to effectively assist their teams. It's a particularly modern piece of research, and it does provide measurable quantitative data which is being carried out. But this article doesn't provide a lot of information about the methodology of the investigation. It's just a very brief outline, and it can't particularly be relied upon as a valid academic source for that reason. And its purpose isn't really to be academic, it's actually just to train and influence organisations. It's clearly evident that theorists all agree that answering the question, what is critical thinking, is a particularly difficult one, and it's a very broad term with numerous competing definitions from various theorists with different views. In his 2007 journal, Rick D. Rudd suggests this, stating, "To date, much work has been completed in multiple disciplines in the name of critical thinking. A great deal of this work not only leaves one wondering how it's measured, but also leaves one groping for a clear definition of critical thinking. And finding the answers to these questions is particularly difficult, but we could start by looking at the history of the term. So it may be reasonable to suggest that it's been given importance particularly recently, critical thinking that is. According to Met and Demir et al. In their 2011 journal, it's become important to educational settings within the last two decades. However, the idea of it generally is argued to have started in ancient Greek times over 2,500 years ago, and this idea is one that's widely accepted by most theorists when it comes to critical thinking. So it does provide validity within the argument, but it could be questioned where the idea of critical thinking having Greek roots comes from, as there's little evidence provided by authors, unlike modern research, like the previously mentioned study by the American Management Association, which gives measurable results from today's organisational environment. On the other hand, the idea of critical thinking deriving from Greek roots is agreed by numerous theorists. For example, the Critical Thinking Society also stated that the word critical derives etymology from Greek roots. Met and Demir et al. Goes on to explain this, saying, "Socrates, one of the philosophers of ancient Greek, improved a method aiming at questioning fixed ideas and prejudices, and always wanted the one against him to prove the accuracy of the idea by asking questions before accepting the accuracy of ideas put forward. This may help provide a basic definition of critical thinking, that it means to question taken for granted assumptions, though critical thinking has clearly evolved from this time, and its importance with education ideas can be suggested to be a key feature of critical thinking. But how relevant is this to HR managers? Well, on page 140, author and theorist Neil Postman also argued the importance of questioning in his 1979 book Teaching as a Conserving Activity, suggesting all our knowledge results from questions, which is another way of saying that questioning is our most important intellectual tool. There are numerous approaches to human resource management that managers are aware of, for example, the best fit and best practice approach. And challenging each of these approaches could be vital when choosing to adopt an approach that is best for a particular organisation, and this could be done by questioning each approach and the components of it. So what are the strengths and weaknesses, and how do they compare? Though Postman was a well-known theorist and author, and I do agree with the importance of questioning, he was known to be writing about education within schools in particular. And is this a still a strong supporting statement when it comes to HR managers? It could be argued that this statement may be true when it comes to learning as a child, but perhaps not as much within a management role. However, after looking at various job descriptions of human resource management, I think it can perhaps be argued that questioning after analysis is key within the job role. This was made evident to me as it was stated in one particular job description, but also highlighted in many others, that the manager should develop, implement and maintain HR policies and procedures as well to ensure effective, fair and consistent management of staff throughout the organisation. Like I mentioned earlier, in order to develop, implement and maintain these strong strategies, we could we should be consistently questioning and evaluating how well the organisation is doing and seeing what can be improved. So this particular book was published in 1979, and even since then, ideas around critical thinking as well as teaching has hugely evolved, and this may weaken its validity. A final comment on the statement made by Postman is that it could be argued to be an emotive argument, as he uses maximisers which manipulate the reader into instantly agreeing with the statement. For example, he makes a bold statement: questions are the most important tool. However, it's clear that Postman was a critically acclaimed author and theorist, and as well as this, he was clearly writing in order to assist academics, which could suggest his views came from much knowledge within the topic area. HR managers should be using these skills during appraisals to critically evaluate employees in order to best see how well they are doing within the organisation, but also assist them in reflecting on themselves critically. In order to do this, it can be suggested that HR managers themselves need to be able to think and reflect in an effective manner. John Bratton discusses the importance of critical reflection, stating in his 2010 book Work and Organisational Behaviour that adult education scholars emphasise the need for critical reflection as an essential component of the learning process. Here he's saying that in order to learn and improve, we need to be able to analyse and evaluate our own behavioural skills. However, numerous issues can be raised here. How can we train critical reflection successfully? Firstly, training HR managers and more widely employees to think critically can use valuable resources of the company, particularly time and money, and it may not even be particularly beneficial to the company in the long run. Yes, it assists employees in evaluating and improving their performance, however it may take a long time for this to benefit the organisation as a whole. Training in order to improve is a huge part of HR. You have to manage numerous employee situations, so it could be a vital skill. Furthermore, can critical thinking actually be learned? In a 1998 report on teaching critical thinking, Diane F. Halpern suggests there are numerous qualitatively different types of evidence showing that students can become better thinkers as a result of appropriate instruction, suggesting that teaching critical thinking can be successful. She goes on to suggest a four-part model for enhancing critical thinking, consisting of ideas derived from cognitive psychology. Simply, psychology suggests cognition literally means knowing. In other words, psychologists from this approach study cognition, which is the mental act or process by which knowledge is acquired. In the 2010 book on cognitive psychology, Eisen and Keene suggest a link between it and critical thinking. Our ability to reflect in a complex way on our lives, to plan and solve problems that arise in everyday situations, is the bedrock of thinking behaviour. When it comes to critical thinking, a cognitive approach would suggest that it's all based around internal processes in mind. The theory would suggest critical thinking is essential for learning. It gives forms of thinking, it suggests forms of thinking within the approach: problem solving, decision making, judgment, deductive and inductive reasoning, critical thinking. So critical thinking is hugely highlighted. It would suggest it can be learned by HR managers and the employees they assist. Though as mentioned earlier, this can be expensive and time consuming. However, this could also suggest that as we learn in general, critical thinking skills are developed anyway. It could be more common sense that something needs to be learned, maybe just assist with them. A huge strength of cognitive psychology is that the approach has numerous well-known studies that investigate the processes we go through in our minds when performing particular behaviours and provide much evidence. This is unlike the philosophical idea about critical thinking deriving from ancient Greek times, mentioned earlier in statements made by the theorists like Postman. For example, Loftus and Palmer's study of eyewitness testimony and the cognitive processes of memory. However, how relevant are these critical thinking in human resource management? They may suggest links between learning and critical thinking, perhaps, but studies based on cognitive process and critical thinking in relation to managers in particular aren't particularly evident. A further weakness of cognitive approaches is that they can be reductionist. For example, reducing critical thinking ideas down to just internal processes, but it does suggest that there is a strong link between critical thinking and learning. Could be taught to managers in order to assist employees, but comes from common sense. So to conclude, a number of theories, views and ideas of critical thinking have been discussed, as well as analysed and evaluated to give an idea of their validity and contribution to the argument of whether critical thinking is vital. Ideas have been then applied to HR roles to discuss the importance within the HR management job. It's still difficult to come up with an answer to this question, but it may be suggested that it can't be confirmed whether critical thinking skills are completely vital. Though links can be made, there are no arguments or theories completely strong enough to prove that they are integral to an HR manager. They can all still be questioned. However, when looking at the job description of an HR manager, we can see some areas where critical thinking will be useful and benefit employees in the long term, perhaps the organisation as a whole. But is it worth the resources? Due to the fact it isn't particularly easy to measure critical thinking within an organisation, it's difficult to tell whether they're really benefiting and worth the resources it takes to teach and implement critical thinking. In addition to this, it's necessary to teach critical thinking. Is it necessary to teach critical thinking? Where there is clearly a huge link between critical thinking and learning, it may be suggested that critical thinking is just a part of our common sense, so it isn't a vital skill to learn within the organisations. Therefore, I personally think that though critical thinking is a useful skill to possess and it can be applied successfully to areas of roles taken on by an HR manager, it isn't completely vital as approaches and theories are still very questionable, and the link between thinking critically and learning suggests it is a skill that people learn throughout life and everyday experience, perhaps not one that can be successfully taught and implemented across an organisation. Thank you.